watching Roll Tide Daily, the new daily program for Crimson Tide fans, presented by SEC Country. Now, here's your host, former Alabama All-American, Mike Johnson.
Hey everyone, and welcome back into the special Wednesday edition of Roll Tide Daily. You guys know what that music means when it hits your computer, when it hits your phones, wherever you guys are, choosing to view this Roll Tide Daily. I guess not special edition, but having a lot of fun here over the next 30 minutes. Obviously, a little bit late. Apologize for being a little bit late on your screens, but hope you guys will continue to follow along, share the show, do the same things you always do. Like the intro said, my name is Mike Johnson. I used to play for Alabama. Got a chance to do a lot of things in a uniform, and now I'm sitting in front of the camera talking about Bama's best each and every day. Now, if you'll remember, yesterday we crossed off a couple of lines talking about players from the past, players from the future. Today's really a countdown-heavy kind of day, I guess. We're going to talk about Heisman Odds. We're going to talk about SI.com's top 100 players. We've got a list from Christopher Walsh of the best running backs in a Bama uniform to never win a Heisman Trophy. And then we're going to talk about the best opposing quarterback. So I want to kick off the show today and get that question today started. Who's the best opposing team quarterback you ever saw Bama play? I answered this question earlier on Twitter. In person, in uniform for me, it was Tim Tebow doing it in person and then sitting in the stadiums. Actually, Deshaun Watson a few years back out there in Phoenix, watching that game out there. He absolutely lit Alabama's defense up, so I don't think that's surprising for a lot of people. But getting that kind of question of the day out of the way, talking about the best opposing team quarterback you saw Bama face. And we're going to dig into that a little bit deeper later in the show. BamaHammer.com puts out their list of opposing quarterbacks Bama will see later on this year they're very, very good. A couple of you guys already weighing in. Sean, don't know how to say your last name. Roll Tide from Mobile. Dave Hardy. Roll Tide, a couple of you guys already getting it in. David Farish, good morning, Mike. Roll Tide from Bend, Oregon. From Bend, Oregon, man. I've heard that's beautiful. I was supposed to go out there a couple of weeks from now, but had to cancel my trip. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into topic number one. And the conversation comes from SI.com. Sports Illustrated's college football covered. Now, if you'll remember yesterday on the show, they went ahead and put out their snubs, right? It's like they're trying to get ahead of everybody and put out who they already snubbed in a bunch of these categories. A couple of Bama players were on that list, Jerry Jeudy and Najee Harris. Now, I understand, like I said yesterday, I understand why guys like that are getting snubbed. Neither one really a proven commodity on a national landscape, especially when you talk about top 100 players. But I expect Najee Harris and Jerry Jeudy to both be a big part of this Alabama team moving forward. There were 4 players included in the early release yesterday. Now, they released this a little bit at the time. I don't blame them over at SI.com. Yesterday, they got out number 50, 51 through 100, I guess, to start off the first part of that countdown. 4 Bama players included on that list yesterday of 51 to 100. Starts off with Isaiah Buggs, obviously the cog right there in the middle of the defensive line. Everybody really expecting him to really step up next to Raekwon Davis this year. Had 5 tackles back in the national title game. A lot of Alabama fans, Georgia fans will remember that from watching that. Then you get to 84, right? I mean, you can't put Tua too far up this list. Now, we mentioned earlier in the offseason, CBS Sports list Tua as their number 2 quarterback in the country behind Will Grier. A lot of people kind of projecting what Tua might be towards the end of the year. SI.com taking a little bit more of a reserved approach in terms of what that's going to be. Now, obviously, they haven't finished their top 100 list, but let me give you an idea where some of the other quarterbacks landed. Shea Patterson coming in at number 80. Jared Stidham coming in at number 83. Jordan Ta'amu from Ole Miss coming in at 76. And a little bit of a talking point for a lot of Alabama fans. Jake Fromm coming in at 65, a good 19 spots ahead of Tua Tagovailoa. A lot of people remember what Tua did back in the national title game, obviously, and that's going to be a point of contention moving forward. Moving on down the list from SI.com, you got Damian Harris, the starting running back. Really, a guy who I highlighted yesterday, I thought might be the kind of bell cow back for Alabama. It might be one of these guys who maybe ends up running away with some of the carries at the end of the year, a la Derrick Henry back in 2015, who wound up with 395 carries. Damian Harris didn't even get half of those last year and still wound up with 1,000 rushing yards. So I think that he's one of those guys that really could end up running away with things at the end of the year, possibly if he's able to get the carries. But like I said, we already mentioned Najee Harris, and there's a number of other backs they're going to be fighting for that. And to round out this, this first 50, I guess you can call it, from SI.com, Dylan Moses, who obviously a lot of people are projecting as well about what Dylan Moses will be. He had a little bit of time to shine there at the end of the year last year before a foot injury there in bowl practice derailed his season. But, here's a guy who has 10 tackles in the Iron Bowl. Really, the athletic upside, we talked about him yesterday, really being offered back in the 8th grade. The athletic upside is absolutely huge when you talk about this. The combination of Dylan Moses and Mack Wilson there in the middle linebacking core is going to be extremely good for the next few years to come. Now, I do want to bounce back to Tua Tagovailoa for a little bit and really break down what we see in this quarterback discussion. Everybody talks about Tua, right? You saw him for one half of football. Not so much. I think Bama fans will remind you we saw him against Vanderbilt. We saw him against Tennessee. We saw him against Ole Miss. We saw a lot of the things that Tua was able to do throughout the season last year that make us think that possibly he deserves to be a little bit higher than 84th on the list. But obviously, you still have the Jalen Hurts quarterback competition. It's going to be ongoing. It's going to be a lot of, what you see going on there in the near future. Ron Hall Jr. already weighing in. Tua should be at least in the top 50. I tend to agree with you. I understand why it's a little bit reserved from SI.com. But listen, we're going to put Shea Patterson, what did I say he was at 80? What has Shea Patterson done that's been so much more special than what Tua Tagovailoa has done? Shea Patterson starts half the year last year, obviously, for Ole Miss. Half the year before with the injury to Chad Kelly. We don't really know what he's getting. He's not exactly going to a pass-happy attack up there in Michigan. So there is a little bit in there to be angry about as far as Shea Patterson. I would not put Jake Fromm as high as 65. Jordan Ta'amu sitting there at 76, the other SEC quarterback from Ole Miss. I think that's a little bit of a hard pill to swallow for a lot of Tua fans that are looking at what could possibly be done in this upcoming season. But if other guys, Jerry Jeudy and Devontae Smith and a lot of these guys are able to really come around, I think it's going to be one incredible season to watch. I think he's going to continue to kind of ease up on that list down from 84. I don't know where I've had him. Ron Hall Jr., like I said, he says top 50. I don't know. Top 50 is a little bit of a head scratcher for me. We're going to talk about, obviously, probably moving to the top 40s at least by the time the season's over, if not really being probably in the top 5, if we're being honest, by the time January comes around. Stephen Roll Tide Garrett asked, did Hurts make the list? Not yet, and he was not on the list of snubs. And so I don't foresee him making the list over Tua Tagovailoa. It sounds like in their description on number 84 on the list, talking about Tua, that, hey, he still has to win this competition. I don't think Jalen Hurts is going to make the list. It's going to be interesting to kind of see how things kind of round out. Now, I will mention in just a second, we are going to talk about Jalen and his Heisman odds, but so far on this SI Top 100, didn't make the list. I think it's going to be interesting to watch, really, Tua moving forward and how much noise he's able to make. That postseason list could look a lot different to a lot of Alabama fans, especially when you talk about Najee Harris, Jerry Jeudy, some of the names they've already mentioned that were snubbed. Tua sneaking in there at 84, not really so much of that big of a shocker, I guess, when you talk about the fact that he hasn't started any games. Robbie Harris saying Jalen still has a lot to say about who starts. Absolutely agree with that. I don't think that one's too far from being over yet. Got a couple of fans from Georgia and LSU watching over the YouTube comment section. Shannon Burgess and Enrique Murillo, appreciate you guys supporting over there. Hope it's not too much Bama for you, but we love to talk about Tua Tagovailoa and a lot of our Heisman odds and Damian Harris and a lot of these guys moving on down the list. So to get to topic number 2, I think this has a lot to do with topic number 1, right? We mentioned the fact that Tua comes in at 84. Haven't seen Jalen Hurts so far on the list from SI.com, but you know what list he is on? Updated Heisman odds. And I know a lot of people around the Southeast, especially around the University of Alabama, love to follow Heisman odds, love to figure out really where some of these guys fit in. And I think it's interesting, too, to kind of highlight the fact that when you talk about the better players in the SEC, a lot of these guys are up front in terms of the Heisman odds. I think we have that graphic to show you guys right here. Now, it does feature Tua. It does feature Jalen. Vegas kind of hedging their bets as far as those two guys go. Tua, tied with Jake Fromm really at the top of these SEC players list. They're 10-1. I think it's pretty good money for Tua Tagovailoa or Jake Fromm. I think that when you look at those guys and the way their team's built up, as good as both of those teams should be moving on down the list, it's not a long shot to say one of those quarterbacks. Jarrett Stidham, a little bit of disrespect. Now, I'm not going to get on Roll Tide Daily and talk about Jarrett Stidham and talk about how good he is. A little bit of disrespect there at 25-1, though. This guy has done a lot of good things in his short time at Auburn, and look for him to make a lot of noise here in the upcoming season. Now, I do want to mention there the rest of that list. If you're going to bet on Drew Lock or Nick Fitzgerald at 33-1, I will be your bookie. I will be your Vegas. I will be your sports book. Send your money to me at 33-1, and I'll be sure to, when Drew Lock or Nick Fitzgerald win the Heisman Trophy from Missouri or Mississippi State later in the year, I'll be sure to send your check out to wherever you want me to mail it back to. I'll be your bookie on that one. Neither one of those guys really, in my opinion, are going to be one of those guys that are at the top of the list. The Heisman so much these days is about winning football games. It's about what your team is, where you're at in the standings, where you're at in the top 25. Drew Lock, in my opinion, under Derek Dooley and Barry Odom, I don't know if he's going to be bouncing towards the top. And so much really left to be loved about Nick Fitzgerald and that receiving core over at Mississippi State. So 33-1 for both those guys. I'm not touching any of that. But let's get back to Jalen and Tua and the tide that's at hand. It is interesting a little bit that you do see Vegas kind of hedging their bets just a little bit. Let's stick Jalen in there. Let's see how many people want to talk about Jalen Hurts possibly winning the Heisman Trophy. I think he's a longer shot than 20-1 odds. I think you're probably not getting your worth out of betting on Jalen Hurts at this point because he's not even the odds-on favorite to win the starting quarterback job. So if you're looking at Jalen Hurts to win the Heisman Trophy and you're betting at 21 odds, you're going to be out there a little bit. But Tua at 10-1, honestly, sounds pretty close to what I would think. You bet $100, you win $1,000. For those of y'all that don't follow up in Vegas very much, that's a pretty good return on your money when you're really going out on a limb talking about what Tua is. I think a lot of people obviously kind of notching the SI.com saying he should be in the top 50. Guess what? Good way to make that noise is to get after it in the Heisman votings. Lisa Jones England, hey Mike, how about the best teams list? Bama's on that list, no doubt. Roll Tide roll. Absolutely agree with that. Matt Merle saying good things. Stidham lost 4 games. He absolutely did lose 4 games. I would argue that Gus Malzahn's a lot of the reason they lost those 4 games. But I'm not getting on Roll Tide Daily to talk about Jared Stidham. Obviously, that's another conversation to have for an absolutely another day. Michael Lloyd saying Najee should be on the list, talking about the SI.com list. I agree with you. They mentioned the fact that he was a snub, just not enough love to get into that top 100 just yet. Did mention that Damian Harris lands at 70. Now, I expect him to be one of those guys that jumps up the list too, in terms of Tua, in terms of Dylan Moses. I think Isaiah Buggs as well. I think all 4 of those guys we mentioned on that list probably land somewhere in the top 50 after the season is over. It's just, you're replacing guys at Alabama, right? You're replacing some of the linebackers, and a lot of those guys still have to make a name for themselves. So that's one of the things that's going to get on down the list. Jazz Hatcher saying the problem for Tua is he'll be out of the game by the 3rd quarter. I think that's something definitely to follow along with. And I think if you're talking about making a bet on Jalen or making a bet on Tua, Jalen at 20-1, maybe some mop-up duty, maybe Tua gets injured. I don't know. I mean, it's a lot of things left to play out still. If Jalen's even going to be on the roster, if Tua's going to win the starting job, if Jalen's going to win the starting job. So if you're going to make one of those bets, I would just tell you to be careful where you're going, honestly, and not go too far out on a limb financially for what you're putting Ron Hall Jr. weighing back in. I don't know if Jalen or Tua are a Heisman caliber, honestly. A lot of those voted and winners do so much as individuals, and Saban likes to work as a team, everyone doing their job. I think it is interesting to look at the fact that Bama under Saban, really other than AJ, haven't really had a Heisman caliber quarterback when you talk about some of these guys. Now, Blake Sims was very good. Jacob Cochran did his job very well. Jalen Hurts for the last couple of years has been very good as well. I don't know that any of them were knocking down the door the way A.J. McCarron is. I think that the hype, though, at this point is great enough for Tua. I honestly don't think if Tua is able to win the Heisman Trophy, that statistically that's what some of the voters are going to be hanging their hat on. I think voters are paying enough attention. The name Tua Tagovailoa has been mentioned a million times this offseason. I think the hype is right where it needs to be in terms of maybe Tua making a possible run, sitting there at 10-1 odds. Victoria Lynn Burdnick, sleeper maybe towards the Heisman. Watch Damian Harris if he gets some serious yards and Bama wins games. Now, that's something I can hop on with. Anytime you're talking about Damian Harris and getting that yardage, the bell cow back, I'm telling y'all, it's a possibility this year that Damian Harris really runs away with some of those carries. It's expected to be running back by committee, but it was the same way back in 2015. Derrick Henry runs away with some of those carries, almost 400 carries. Nick Saban really trusted Derrick Henry down the stretch, and I think that's going to be a possibility. When we talk about it. Enrique Murillo, the Georgia fan over in the YouTube comment section. Mike, let's call Tua the starter. What if Tua comes out struggling and has to later be replaced by Hurts? What would you think about the quarterback situation then? I wouldn't be shocked. Now, Tua hasn't started any games. There's a reason that people are holding him at 84 in the SI.com top 100. I think there's reason to be a little bit hesitant. But listen, this has never been an offense that's really relied on quarterback play there at Nick Saban. I think that the quarterbacks have always just been what they are. I don't foresee Tua struggling enough to get replaced by Jalen Hurts at any point if he does win the starting quarterback job. Now, I do want to move on to topic number 3, and this is something that's really kind of close to my heart as an offensive lineman that played with some of the guys that's been up and down this list. Our buddy Christopher Walsh from SECCountry.com here in the studios we're sitting at right now. Christopher Walsh, one of the great writers that follows Alabama. He's been on the Alabama beat forever. He was with, I think, Tuscaloosa News back when I was a player. Christopher Walsh has been diving deep into kind of the Bama record books here lately. And his column yesterday comes out and talks about who is the best Bama running back to never win a Heisman. So you list the Bama running backs, kind of talk about them top to bottom. Who's the guy really you want to point to? He brought up a ton of good names. Now you have to remember you're gonna take Derrick Henry and Mark Ingram out of this list in terms of what we're talking about here. But I think we do have the graphic to show you guys in terms of Trent Richardson, Bobby Humphrey, and Sean Alexander. Now, if any of you guys were really around for the Bobby Humphrey, I know a lot of the great fans in the comment section were around for Bobby Humphrey and Sean Alexander. Bobby Humphrey's not a guy I got to see very much. I'm only 31 years old, so a lot of you guys that saw Bobby Humphrey probably remember how magical he was. Really, Bobby Humphrey known for his all-purpose yards. I think he's got the record at Alabama for all-purpose yards. Trent Richardson, the first winner of the Doak Walker Award at Alabama. Never mind the Heisman Trophy, being the Heisman Trophy finalist. He's one of those guys that really was bigger than life there at Alabama. And Sean Alexander, coming in third place for Christopher Walsh, has the record at Alabama for most carries in a career. I think he's at 3,500 yards. Sean Alexander had in his career, went on to be the NFL MVP. I think a first-round draft pick, if I'm not mistaken. Chris McLeod weighing in saying Alexander the Great. Jazz Hatcher saying Trent was a beast. Now, I played one season with Trent Richardson. I was lucky enough to kind of share the field with Trent Richardson for 1 year. Don't let his NFL career kind of overshadow what he was at Alabama. I think that's really important for me to kind of look at in terms of people that are on the Trent Richardson bandwagon. So many times other fan bases want to talk about what Trent Richardson was in the NFL, what he was for the Colts, what he was for the Browns, what he could possibly be in the CFL. Trent Richardson was a great college running back. There's no other way to put it. He was a physical specimen. He could outrun people. He could run through people. I think when you talk about his career, that's one of the highlights of me being able to play with him, as I was very lucky. Finished with 3,130 career rushing yards, which puts him 7th on the list of all-time leading rushers at Alabama. Obviously, Mark Ingram and Derrick Henry on part of that list, but Christopher Walsh thought that Trent Richardson was probably the best running back in Alabama history to never win a Heisman Trophy. Like I said, Bobby Humphrey there coming in second. 3,420 yards, as a running back. Like I said, he's kind of known for being an all-purpose back more than anything. He's one of those guys that was able to return kicks, do a lot of things in the punt game, the kickoff return games. A lot of people will, kind of talk about that when you talk about Bobby Humphrey. Honestly, Sean Alexander is the one on this list that I'm a little bit iffy about. Listen, he is a Bama legend. He did a lot of incredible things in the NFL. I wasn't paying too close of attention back in 98, 99, whatever it was, when Sean Alexander was in a Bama uniform. But he's one of those guys that really has been bigger than life because of his NFL career. Really kind of, the opposite in a lot of ways of what Trent Richardson was in the NFL. But bears mentioning that both these guys are absolute legends when it comes to Alabama football and some of the things they were able to do in their career. Chris Hall kind of going back to the quarterback debate. Tua and Hurts will split all year. Good for the team, not for votes. Harris at running back will set records this year. Now, I do think it's interesting, too, if both these quarterbacks do split reps. If you see Jalen Hurts against Louisville and you see Tua come out against Arkansas State and Jalen against Ole Miss, that's going to take away from a lot of the statistic possibility of either one of these guys kind of winning the Heisman Trophy. But I do think that sheds a light, to answer the rest of this comment, I do think that sheds a light back on Damian Harris and Najee Harris and one of these running backs really trying to separate themselves and get over that hump. Now, I will say this. I do think it's going to take Bama getting back to the SEC championship game this year. If you want to see one of these guys in the offensive backfield be able to pull off the Heisman Trophy, you're going to have to, to really run the table in a lot of different corners of that schedule if you want to get back to the SEC championship game. I think that's what puts some of these players over the top when you talk about that spotlight being shown on Atlanta, on the Mercedes-Benz Stadium right there at the first weekend of December. I think it's December 1st this year. So, Brian Canterbury weighing in. Have a great day, Mike Roll Tide. Appreciate you guys watching. Remember to share the show. If you like hanging out with Roll Tide Daily, every Monday through Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern time, we like hanging out with you guys and kind of chopping it up and talking about Bama football here on June 20th before even things really get started. SEC Media Days around the corner. Training camp coming up around the corner. A lot of these guys are kind of grinding in terms of what the product is they're trying to put on the field. While we talk about Heisman Trophy odds, they're talking about times running 110s out on the field right now. I've been a part of that, and that's one of those things you don't want to get too far into. William Lee weighing over in the YouTube comment section. Hurts at 20-1 is a joke. Also saying Harris needs to get a lot more carries than last year. I agree with that. I was disappointed down the stretch that Damian Harris was not allowed more carries. I can't remember. I think it's 8.2 yards per carry that I've written down right here that Damian Harris had last year, really in that stretch run. That could have been a lot. I think his ladder ability and top end speed is one of those things that Bama is going to need in the long run. Becky Burton Pritchard weighing in, saying Sean Alexander is the best running back that never won a Heisman at Alabama. Becky Burton Pritchard wouldn't know that. She's been a Bama fan for quite a long time. Jimmy Williams weighing in and saying Roll Tide. Ron Hall Jr. asking, did Johnny Football beat Trent for the Heisman Trophy? I don't believe so. Is that true? Do you guys remember 2012 Heisman Trophy standings? I guess that was Johnny Football in 2012, and I think Eddie Lacy was a running back at Alabama by that time, right? That's the year he ran over Notre Dame in the national championship game. Matt Merle saying no, RG3 did, and that's absolutely correct. Brian Canterbury saying Sean Alexander, 1999, first Iron Bowl victory in Auburn. That's a memory that I know a lot of Alabama fans love to talk about and love to bring up. Now, the next topic of conversation goes back to our question of the day. If you guys remember, the question of the day was, who's the best opposing quarterback you ever saw Alabama play? I mentioned for myself, when I was in uniform, it was Tim Tebow. The guy was larger than life when he stepped on a football field. When I was sitting in the stands, it was Deshaun Watson. Being able to watch him out in Phoenix a few years ago, me and a couple of buddies, kind of made that trip out to Phoenix to watch that game. Deshaun Watson was electric. I mean, it was just very obviously and evident that he was a different caliber of quarterback. Well, our friends over at BamaHammer.com put out their list of the top 5 quarterbacks that Bama will be facing off against this year. And I think it's a very, very interesting list. A ton of different ways to kind of break this down. They started with a little bit of a top 5 countdown, I guess. You got Nick Starkel over at Texas A&M. Under the new leadership of Jim O. Fisher, I think he could really, really have a good year. I'm high on Texas A&M. A lot of people are not going into this year. I'm also high on Ole Miss's passing attack. I think Jordan Ta'amu is one of those guys that with that wide receiver core is going to absolutely light it up. They play Bama in week 3. Hopefully that secondary gets kind of acquainted with each other before that game kicks off there in week 3 of the season. Nick Fitzgerald at Mississippi State. What is he after the ankle injury? I think a lot of people are kind of asking that question in terms of his career and what his legend will be at Mississippi State, starting under a new head coach, Joe Moorhead, this year. It's going to be an interesting dynamic to watch. Number 2, a guy we brought up earlier, a guy who I said is not getting enough love. That's Jarrett Stidham over at Auburn. And I think this list is a little bit of that latest, the latest evidence that this Jarrett Stidham is not getting enough love in terms of being number 2 on this list behind Drew Lock at Missouri. I'm not going to get on love on Jarrett Stidham. This is Roll Tide Daily for a reason, but this guy's getting loved on. Let's think about what the possibilities of him down at Auburn could be. They could have an electric passing offense this year. Drew Lock up at Missouri. I've told you guys this a couple of times on this show. Drew Lock, to me, doesn't scare me. Now, I know he's going to come into Tuscaloosa. I know he's got some athletes at the wide receiver position, but this is an offense under Derek Dooley, under Barry Odom's guidance as the head coach. This does not scare me for a lot of different reasons. Drew Lock being the least of them. I think that he has a couple of interceptions down in Tuscaloosa. I think this game ends up being an absolute runaway in terms of what I expect Alabama's defense to do to Drew Lock right there in the middle of the season. I don't think Drew Lock and Derek Dooley and all the other people that play in Como up there in Columbia, Missouri, I don't think they're going to be ready for Bryant-Denny Stadium and what Tuscaloosa is going to kind of bring to the table in terms of the thunder down in that stadium. That can be a very tough place for opposing quarterbacks to play, especially when you're labeled under Heisman odds or possible first-round draft pick or one of these guys that a lot of people are labeling are better than Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts right now. Drew Lock's going to have a tough Saturday, in my opinion, from one of these guys. So Stephen Early says, so 2 completely unproven quarterbacks top the list over from who went bell to bell against a very good Alabama defense. How the hell does that work? Probably shouldn't have said that. Listen, I don't know if you were looking at that very close and maybe you were looking at a different list. These are players that are going to be playing Alabama on the schedule this year, Stephen Early. These are not guys that are just in the SEC. These are guys actually on Alabama's schedule. Jarrett Stidham, Drew Lock, Nick Fitzgerald, Jordan Ta'amu, Nick Starkel, all guys that Bama's going to be facing off against. So I know everybody's quick to point out that Jake Fromm's getting disrespected. I think Jake Fromm's getting plenty of respect on the SI.com list of number 65 of quarterbacks. I think some of those things remain to be seen. Chris McLeod saying Johnny Manziel, one of the best quarterbacks he ever saw. Brian Canterbury saying Johnny Manziel against Alabama was the best he ever saw. Tony Brunson going back to the running back conversation. Derek Lassick. I've heard a lot of people that kind of echo that sentiment in terms of what they think. Ron Hall Jr. asking the question, will Bama go undefeated this year? I expect them to. Now, listen, it's been a long time since Bama's made it through a season undefeated. I was on that team back in 2009. It's hard to do. We had a couple of close games ourselves, winning some games against LSU was a close game. Tennessee was a close game. But I think when you look at the spreads this year and look who they're playing, Bama has the talent to beat any team on the schedule. It's just a matter of getting out there and doing it. Stephen Early kind of apologizing. Whoops, long day. I guess I assume they will play for the Natty again. We're going to let you pass, Stephen Early, and appreciate you weighing in the comment section. Now, I do want to close the show today like I do every Wednesday with the Scott Cochran kind of video of the week, kind of showing you guys what Scott Cochran puts out to the team, puts out to some of the media members, puts out to former players. This one actually does not come from Scott Cochran, but I thought honestly in my head it was too good to leave away from you guys because this is something the official Alabama football Twitter account was able to put out earlier in the week. Scott Cochran kind of, becoming a legend in his own over there in Tuscaloosa, one of those guys that has the Monday motivation, really a lot of the, big part part of the decruitment that's going on there in terms of some of these freshmen, some of these rookies that are showing up in this Alabama football program. Scott Cochran's trying to get their head wrapped around the work that he's going to have to put in front of some of these guys when you talk about the freshmen having to go to work throughout the summer. So the freshmen show up this past Monday. Scott Cochran had a quick message for them. This is from the Alabama football Twitter account, and here's this video right now.
Whatever your mentality is, you got to make sure you find a way to change it. Like, I'm going to do this today because I know where it's going to take me. I'm going to do this now because I know what I'm going for. It's finding your wall, your pain, your weakness. Go after it. Like, that's what you want. I want to see where I can go to today.
Where I keep it going. Right. Find me on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Boy, you got to love that family, right? Family on 3, 1, 2, 3. And Scott Cochran got to say, hey, listen, find your weakness. Go after it. Make sure you're getting things done. Matt Murrell weighing in saying Cochran is a beast. I say it every week on every Wednesday when we bring up the Scott Cochran video of the week. This guy is an absolute animal at what he does. Bama is so lucky to have this guy on staff, getting that little window, getting that little sneak peek into what he brings to his football team. Remember, it's June now. Saban's not there. Saban's not running the drills. Saban's not out on the football field. He's recruiting. He's doing whatever he needs to do kind of inside the building. Scott Cochran right now is the June head coach of this football team, absolutely running things in terms of what he's kind of bringing to the table. Now, I do think that he's one of those guys that really, no matter what he ever asks for in terms of salary, he's probably underpaid. He is very, very valuable to that program. Chris McLeod also weighing in. Scott Cochran is the best motivator. Nick is probably the current toughest to consider. Ron Hall Jr. I'm not really sure what that's talking about, but anyways, appreciate you guys weighing in, obviously, in the comment section today. I think it's been a pretty fun show talking about some of these lists that a lot of people have put out. We talked about SI.com's top 100. I'm going to come back at you tomorrow with a little bit more of that top 100 list. I think they're going to finish that list up today with number 1 through 50. We'll talk about what Bama players are featured in that. Updated the Heisman on today's with 2 at 10-1. Boy, that's pretty juicy money right there talking about that. And the best running back who never won a Heisman at Alabama, we've come up with Trent Richardson, Bobby Humphrey, and Sean Alexander. So appreciate you guys all following along today. Appreciate your comments in the comment section. A lot of good stuff going on there today. Appreciate everybody in the YouTube comment section as well, no matter what fan base you're a part of over there, for being a part of the show. Remember, if you guys like to watch SEC Country Live, and I know quite a few in the comment section absolutely love SEC Country Live, myself and Brandon Adams back on 3 o'clock Eastern time today on the SEC Country Facebook page. But until tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern time on this page, my name is Mike Johnson. Hope you guys have a good Hump Wednesday and Roll Tide.
You've been watching Roll Tide Daily, the new daily program for Crimson Tide fans, presented by SEC Country.